Okay, we're
All
ready to
right,
go.
so welcome back to quantum biology, part three. Um, my apologies for the mishap last time, but it was not my fault. The system failure proved to be stronger than me, and we had to reschedule for today. So um, I think this is more or less where we um, ended the last lecture, and I'll continue. So today we'll really get into the nitty-gritty of what quantum biology is and what is not. And the last lecture in this series will be on specifically the human brain, mind, and consciousness. These kinds of topics where quantum ideas are being liberally tossed around, and I will try to give you my perspective on it. So speaking of perspective, I will start by saying that um, the dimensions of matter are important. They matter, and especially in this discussion, because as I argued earlier, I mean, quantum physics typically is considered with very small objects. So we are at the bottom of the scale. We see quarks and making elementary particles, neutrons and protons, and these make in turn the nuclei of atoms, and atoms, um, many atoms or few, depends on the size of the molecule, create molecules. At this level, we still are very comfortable with using quantum physics directly, and we can compute this with either quantum field theory around here or or quantum mechanics. And then beyond that, for larger systems, we go into quantum chemistry, which is also a very well established area with Nobel Prizes given to chemists who use quantum concepts in density functional theory and using various specific applications. Now, at that point and beyond, we have some kind of blurring of the boundaries, and there is no sharp distinction between what can and cannot be uh, considered a quantum object. And we're talking about well, that's really nanosystems and mesoscale biomolecules in particular. There are some papers in the literature claiming the measurement of wave functions of small proteins. And then beyond that, we will find um, quantum concepts applied to parts of proteins. And what happens beyond is anybody's guess. So here we have biomolecular systems inside the cells with hundreds of thousands of atoms, where a big question mark arises, and I'll tell you why it is tricky, not only because of the size, but also because of the water environment and thermal fluctuations, which typically destroy quantum systems, but not always. And I have to qualify that all of these objections to the use of quantum concepts beyond what is considered to be a standard physics can be overcome with counterexamples. Um, so we'll come to it in a minute. And then we have the cells, smallest cells with 10 billion atoms or so, and organisms 10 to the 20th atoms. And at this level, we use, let's say, mechanics of the cell and thermodynamics and some, simple kinetics of polymerization reactions and diffusion. All of these are, by and large, classical concepts, but again, we can argue that there are exceptions. Many of these reactions are driven energetically by either ATP molecules or GTP, and these molecules uh, come in units, and they have very specific energies. So we call these biological energy quanta. So some of it is at the level of quantization, some of it is not. And this is where difficulty, semantic and otherwise, emerges. A lot of people are sort of ignoring the nuance. And I'm of the opinion that that at the level of living systems, much of their organization and function is well described by classical equations, but not all. And this is where we should focus on. And so sizes, here it's kind of a table comparing different sizes. So here we have typical quantum dimensions, quantum structures, and then chemistry kicks in, smaller molecules. And look at the sizes, the radii. This is a femtometer, which means 10 to the minus 15 meters. If you can imagine that number, that's a million times smaller in radius than a nanometer. A nanometer is where the boundary typically is considered between quantum and classical nanotechnology. You must have heard about that. Then we have the proton size and neutron, and finally atomic scale is here. So this is half an angstrom and above. So 10 to the minus 10th. And we have hydrogen bond, carbon, oxygen, water. Water will be 1.35 angstroms. And then corresponding masses in Daltons, which are the units that are roughly speaking the mass of hydrogen as a baseline. And then we have amino acids, which are the basic units of building blocks of peptides and by extension proteins, with the mass of 110 Daltons, so hydrogen masses. On average, they vary somewhat. Nucleotides or nucleic acids are about 3 times larger than amino acids, and this is the basis of DNA and RNA, and then polymers of these form single-stranded or double-stranded DNA and RNA molecules, and all the machinery of life starts here with the transcription, translation, and then some, as you will see, some scientists claim that even mutations in DNA are quantum transfer processes, or driven by quantum fluctuations. That's quite possible. But then beyond that, we have the cells. Sizes of cells are starting with the smallest bacteria, about fraction of a micron or close to a micron across. So diameter will be about a micron, and bigger cells, several microns or tens of microns, or even up to meters. In the case of neurons, could be as long as a meter. So that gives you a perspective, and you also look at the masses. Now we're talking about at the level of cells, the masses of at least 50 billion proton masses or hydrogen masses. So the size would make it difficult to compute it at the level of quantum, let's say Schrödinger equation. We talked about some fundamental level of understanding, but doesn't mean that it, as I said, that specific events or specific processes are not quantum in nature. And that is another, maybe more colorful representation of the scale of biological systems, dimensions, and here. Why am I showing this? Because here you have something which is very important, namely the probes. We're probing living systems with various experimental techniques, and here they are, let's say, X-ray Crystallography is used for the determination of biomolecular structures such as proteins and DNA and biomolecules. Then we can use ultraviolet to examine larger structures like viruses and organelles. And finally, we in the infrared and visible microwave and visible, of course, microscopy allows us to see individual bacteria and hair structures and insects, and eventually we achieve the size of a sumo wrestler. Okay, and so that was, by the way, I wanted to emphasize the complication in terms of understanding all of this, namely the 11 or 12 orders of magnitude of the biological scales, which is not, it's also hierarchical, so it's not easy to come up with, let's say, a theory of everything, encapsulating all these scales. Even more difficult would be to capture all the biological processes at their various time scales, because I mean, we should start here at the 10 to the minus 12 seconds, actually, where individual molecular motions, such as vibrations of small molecules occur, or bonds. And then we have, okay, so that's right here, picoseconds, 0.2 picoseconds, chemical bond vibrations. That's again the beginning of the scale, and then other, including computational simulations, which actually can go these days up to microseconds or maybe tens of microseconds. But that's the scale of diffusion. And beyond that, we have biological processes on milliseconds, let's say, which are typical for ion channel activity, and then longer scales for operation of neural circuits into fractions of a second and seconds, and then eventually cell events, cell division between, let's say, many minutes to hours, slow, and then lifetime. Billions of seconds is the time scale of an individual's lifetime. Maybe you don't think about that. We talk about lifespan being something like 85 years on average in various countries. I'm not sure in Canada, maybe it's 83, but that would correspond to something like a few billion seconds. If you portray it in the powers of 10, then of course you see, and this would be, I think, the age of the universe. So we have at least on the order of 20 orders of magnitude on the time scale. So that's even harder to, again, put together all of this. And for this reason, let me just skip and come back to it for a second. And for this reason, for these two reasons, we construct science or scientific disciplines in a hierarchical structure, where within each hierarchy you have different elements and different rules of the game, even, as well as they're interlocking to some degree, but only very, very weakly. That is, from elementary particle physics, subatomic physics, you just need electrons and protons to construct the theory of solids, condensed matter physics, and to create chemistry, you just need ions, molecules, and ions and atoms, and then you forget about all of this underneath, and you have the table of the periodic elements, and you kind of develop the rules of the game, the bonds that can be created. And yes, there is an sort of undercarriage of quantum chemistry, but by and large, you can understand everything with simplified rules of bond making and bond breaking. And then from chemistry to biochemistry, you go by restricting the chemical space to just biomolecules, nucleic acids, amino acids, peptides, proteins, sugars, and phospholipids by and large, and then you create everything that the cell needs. And within this, then of course the lessons of quantum chemistry are pretty much lost as the structures become bigger and slower. And that's how you can continue into cell biology, and then beyond cell biology into physiology, and from physiology you can go into sociology and so on. So that's just the nature of the beast, and that's why when we talk about quantum biology, we are making a jump from this level all the way to what is missing in this cell biology and even physiology. So that's a big jump, and of course it needs to be properly argued. I can't really write with this, but you get the picture. And that also goes together with the way we model the observations. So one thing is experiments, another thing is theory and modeling, and this shows you corresponding sort of boxes of modeling levels. This is quantum mechanical models, which are limited to nanometers and nanoseconds, in the form of sort of ab initio, so from first principles. And then if you go into the atomistic models, things like molecular dynamics, models of proteins and protein complexes, you represent each of the units as a atom, basically, with some charges on it, and you don't see electrons typically. So that's lost, just charge distribution. And then even beyond that, when you go into micromolecular assemblies, you do something called coarse-grained models, where in fact you represent even a single amino acid as a point connected with other amino acids by some kind of by a peptide bond, and so on. And then beyond that is continuum representation, continuum models, where the granularity of the constituents is lost completely. You're represented approximately by distribution function. Let's put it this way, and you can look at the scale of length scale and time scale for modeling purposes, which also corresponds to the various units in a biological system. Okay, and this is not fanciful. This kind of thing is for a reason, because of this, which is the combinatorial barrier. Combinatorial barrier limits our ability to analyze or even inspect sets of objects which are as big as 10 to the 100 to the power 110 or larger in number. This is called the immense number, 10 to the power 110, and it's obtained as a simple mental exercise, assuming that the entire universe is a large computer composed of all the hydrogens and atoms as computing units, and each of the units or bits, if you will, can change state on the order of a picosecond. Remember, picosecond was kind of this time scale for bond fluctuations, and then this big computer would run for the entire existence of the universe, which is something like 15 billion years, So if you convert this into picoseconds and the weight of the universe into proton masses, then you obtain this number. So in other words, if the entire universe is a humongous computer worked for the age of the universe, it couldn't even inspect a number of objects that are that large. That seems like an overkill, a number that is just too big to be of practical use, but actually it's not. It's a very realistic number for many objects. For example, the number of possible DNA sequences in the human genome would be vastly larger than this, vastly. The number of possible proteins with, let's say, the length of amino acid, the length of the residues, let's say under 60, 600 or 500 would be also incredibly larger than this by leaps and bounds. So we can say with certainty that there's no way we can use brute force, computational brute force to run through all these sets that you can set up a computer and count all the possible protein structures that are sequences that can be conceived. No, it cannot be done. And for this reason, we find shortcuts, and each subset, let's say protein biochemistry or genetics, or these kinds of fields operate within their own rules and within their own sets, and of course they do not pretend to find all the possible structures, but only those that are, let's say, encountered commonly in nature. Okay, so now with all of this having said, that question was posed by Erwin Schrödinger, the Nobel Prize winner in physics, and the proponent of what we now call the Schrödinger equation, quantum mechanics equivalent of Newton's laws. He wrote that book and asked a lot of questions, including those about the usefulness of quantum mechanics to understand life, but other things like entropy reduction by living systems. But quantum oneness or unitary oneness or quantum concepts of coherence would be very useful to apply to living systems, because if you try to understand the human being or even a single cell from the point of view of individual proteins interacting with other proteins, with all this great complexity, there is simply no conceivable approach that can result in a unified behavior of these systems. So in quantum physics, as you may recall, we have the concept of coherence. We have the concept of linear superposition of wave functions and collective states. I mentioned that briefly. So collective quantum states of even microscopic systems have been observed, and that might serve the purpose of explaining organized, synchronized behavior of living systems. But okay, this is the objection by critics. But so warm, that means quantum coherence typically in places like superconductors or superfluids has not reached room temperature. It's limited. Yes, again, but lasers operate on quantum principles at room temperature easily because they are provided with external energy, so you can drive quantum states and maintain them over macroscopic amounts of time. The aspect of water environment is serious, but also can be overcome because biological water is in a different state than, let's say, tap water. It's not, strictly speaking, liquid. It's what Professor Gerald Pollack from the University of Washington in Seattle wrote in his papers and many books on the topic, is in the fourth state of water, which is a little bit like liquid crystal. It's our ice. It's ordered and organized, so that can help maintain coherence. And then so noisy, okay, that's the same thing really as warm because of thermal noise. There are examples of noisy environments which actually help maintain things like quantum tunneling. There are thin films called Scheibe aggregates that tunnel electromagnetic energy driven electronic processes into activation center, and this is actually increased by temperature rather than decreased, because that promotes the process of hopping from site to site and then finding the lowest energy state in the activation center. So yeah, so we have that, and we have the Schrödinger, who basically is the first quantum physicist to seriously speak about these things. And here we have Charles Darwin, the undisputed crown prince of biology or evolution. And the argument that, so combining these two personality opinions, one could say that Mother Nature had at least maybe more, at least 2 billion years of parallel experimentation on our planet. That means every life form and in every part of the Earth is an example of an experiment trying to optimize design for specific conditions. And if quantum mechanics was discovered by us humans after about 10,000 years of civilization as we know it, then 2 billion years for Mother Nature and incalculable numbers of copies surely must have found something like that as well. And as quantum phenomena offer some very attractive possibilities, including what I said is coherence and tunneling and accelerating enzymatic reactions and quantum computing and so on and so forth. So with this, as well as the fact that natural selection amplifies and retains evolutionary advances, there's at least a logical argument, I would say, that maybe commonsensical argument that that quantum biology is not impossible. All right, so yeah, so quantum computers use entanglement and coherence, and therefore maybe our brains, as in the last lecture I'll try to argue, can operate on some of these principles. Yeah, we talked about these objections. So now, and this is a longer list of objections to quantum biology. I don't want to dwell on it because I think I already dealt with most of it, and also the size and heterogeneity. There is a problem here that I want to emphasize, and it's maybe a technical problem, namely, how do you amplify quantum effects from the lowest level of organization, small, to the next level? As we saw in the beginning of this lecture, we don't really know how signal to noise ratio plays out in this case, how you maintain some of the important information and yet operate the system with the presence of noise that cannot be removed because it's simply thermal noise due to physiological temperature. Okay, so we dealt with this a little bit. Temperature that can be dealt with by energy pumping, wet by structured water maybe. And in fact, if you read Gerald Pollack's book, you will find out that at least 50% of water in the cell is organized into structured water. So especially around the surfaces of membranes and proteins. And then this one, life is slow in comparison to quantum mechanical events. That's a serious argument because as we saw, quantum processes are very short in time. So lifetimes of quantum events are picoseconds or so, or even shorter. And for physiological significance, we need at least milliseconds or maybe nanoseconds of the quantum state to be stable over. That is, again, a technical problem. And I think we are making strides and trying to see how we can extend the lifetime of a quantum state, one of which would be by, again, providing energy deliberately and maintaining this quantum state before it collapses and dissipates. Now, the complexity argument, yes, of course, it is complex, it's difficult, but we have to start somewhere. And just like quantum mechanics was first introduced by solving some specific problems in physics, I think similarly, we can address quantum biology by individual processes which classical, let's say, or standard biology cannot address or is unable to explain. So yeah, this is an argument about quantum biology, quantum mechanics, leading to fuzziness. That means this cloud, the wave function rather than deterministic positions and velocities. That I think is a moot point because, as I mentioned, not all of the quantum systems, biological systems must be in a quantum state. Maybe only some significant parts performing some special functions. So yeah, that's, in my opinion, not a very significant argument against it. Now the question of reality, life is real. Well, that opens up a Pandora's box about what reality is and whether we actually observe reality or maybe just observe models of reality. This is philosophical. I'm acutely aware of the discussions going on between various schools of thought, philosophers who claim, for example, that there is no objective reality, that the only thing that we call reality is our image, or Plato's cave kind of allegory where we see the reflections of reality. Or another argument is that we just imagine things, whereas the world behind the veil is completely unreachable by investigations, either human or through technology. Anyway, let's just leave this because it's let's leave it to the philosophers. Okay, and this is the argument that Mother Nature is a nanotechnology master, working feverishly on trillions of examples, systems over billions of years. So all of these problems, to my mind, are either solvable now or can be solved by refining our methodology. All right, so this is a list of features of life which are unsolved by molecular biology as of yet, and quantum concepts would help at least, if not solve them. So collective dynamics of many degrees of freedom. That's the collective behavior, like in condensed matter physics, where you have these quantum collective states, phonons and magnons and polaritons and polarons, spin waves. This is a concept that has not yet penetrated into biology, and it would be very important because that allows for across-the-board communication and synchronization of events, which is absolutely essential for any life form to exist as a unit and to be internally synchronized. Now, then life, this is a often ignored aspect. Life is an out of thermodynamic equilibrium metastable state. What does it mean? Well, it means that every living system overcomes the entropy increase and therefore is out of thermodynamic equilibrium, which will be maximum entropy. Maximum entropy is the tendency of thermodynamic systems, and to overcome it, it has to be energy pumped, as I already argued with ATP or GTP or in general, or even electromagnetic waves through photosynthesis for plants. So it really relies on energy flux into the system so it can occupy this metastable state, which goes against the tendency to increase entropy and therefore disorder. And so that's basically what it is. In order to create functional order, you must transduce energy and maintain this out of equilibrium state. That is, I would say, virtually completely ignored in any sort of biology-based models of systems, living systems. So there is also the question of local orders and global orders, how order is generated, maintained, and transformed sometimes from order to order. And that's, again, the hierarchical organization. How does it happen? Maybe even physics right now is not very well equipped to address this one, but certainly not classical biology. So complexity, emerging order without repetition. Now, this is a biggie, short and long-range correlations. Long-range correlations, in other words, what happens at one end of the cell, the other end, the far end, feels, perceives, or reacts to. How does that happen almost instantaneously or very fast without some physical forces, not chemical or mechanical even? I would argue, and that's a long argument, that electromagnetic communication must be part of that. Okay, so living organisms are open because they transduce and energy as well as material, irreversible systems. So that reversibility is another interesting aspect, which kind of leads to the finite lifespan, because they are cyclical, but only approximately cyclical. That is, every turn of the cycle, whether it's enzymatic metabolic processes, lifespan, finite lifespan, or some other processes, they are never exactly the same the next time. There's always some sort of damage or imperfection introduced into the system, and you generate gradually more and more disorder. And that's how the aging process can be understood. So if, and by the way, in statistical thermodynamics and chemical thermodynamics, if a system is perfectly periodic, I'm trying to draw a perfect circle, so it goes in circles, then there's no entropy production. Entropy is constant for systems which are perfectly periodic. But if the system is imperfectly quasi-periodic, then entropy gradually increases. So for a system like this, you could draw a variable and sinusoidal function describing this variable. So that's zero entropy. But in reality, it's never like that. There's always a little bit of a damping. So instead of a perfect sinusoidal function, you have something which is, I'm going to exaggerate, going down and down. This may take, in reality, billions or trillions of oscillations before you see noticeable decrease in the amplitude of this process, but it always is decreasing. So entropy is increasing, the amplitude of the process is decreasing. Eventually, you achieve thermodynamic equilibrium, which is called death. So finite lifespan has to do with a very gradual, insidious entropy creep and diminished oscillations, diminished performance, et cetera, et cetera. All right. So I'll just spend a minute on this one. Nonlinearity of interaction. This, by the way, is quite sophisticated, one word, but it's very very important because biological systems are par excellence nonlinear. That means, what does nonlinear mean? It means that the effect of some action, intervention, is not proportional to the cause. Normally, we think that these two are proportional, but in living systems, not really. Quite often, you may represent it as something called dose response. Dose response. So response, dose response. Response will be a biological reaction to some dose. Could be the dose of a drug, a nutrient, or toxin, all kinds of things. And it's not, this would be linear. So dose response would go linearly, either this way or that way down. But in fact, quite often is something completely different, like this. It goes to saturation. At first, it's a rapid increase. It's called ignition. Then linear. There's a linear part of it, but only a very narrow range, and eventually you flatten out. So that's definitely not linear. But this is just one example. There are many other examples. I don't want to dwell on it. And in physics from the 1970s into the 2000s, there were a lot of studies done on nonlinear processes, nonlinear dynamics, and that led to things like deterministic chaos, fractals, solitons, solitary waves, a lot of important conceptual advances, which penetrated into biology and physiology. I can just give you some examples, like the representation of the heart rate variability and heart rate dynamics using a combination of deterministic and chaotic behavior, the same with the brain, fractal structure of various organs, the lungs, the vasculature of the kidneys, and so on. So this is a huge area, and just one word for it, nonlinear interactions, which govern biological systems by and large. And that leads to some incredibly interesting and intriguing physics. So these are the problems that biology alone cannot solve. Now, what is, according to Wikipedia, I don't know if this has been updated or not, but quantum biology as a field is defined as applications of quantum mechanics to biological objects and problems. Yes, I agree with this. However, this is important. Usually it is taken to refer to applications of the non-trivial quantum features. What does that mean? And what is trivial? Almost nothing is trivial, but the non-trivial would be superpositions. That is the superposition of states either in space or some other variable. No single value, fuzzy. So these wave functions, superposition of states, which, yes, in biology, again, we want to think that things are so well determined, but when you think about, and we'll talk about later in the next lecture, the human brain, the states of mind, then you right away understand that superposition of states maybe is not such a crazy concept. Okay, the next one is non-locality. So that means the no local realism. So long-range interactions. So non-local. So global, just like wave functions spread out to infinity, and the reality is not determined by local values. Okay, that's another property which this definition implies is part of quantum biology. And then this one, entanglement, that's very interesting, and that's entangled particles, which means that, for example, two electrons, which are we talked about this, but maybe I'll just remind you, they're combined into a state with no spin. One electron will spin up, the other down, and they are allowed to move apart from each other in this, starting from this state. If you do a measurement, perform a measurement on this particle some distance away, let's say 100 miles away, this one, the other one will simultaneously declare itself to be in the negatives, in the downspin state. So as if they were invisibly connected, or in other words, communicated through space at infinite speed, which is what special relativity tells us is not possible. But it's not a signal. Well, it's a bit strange to say the least. But it's definitely in physics has been demonstrated experimentally. This was the Nobel Prize last year, I think, or maybe 2022, I think. Entanglement. Now, again, in biology, that wouldn't be so strange, I think, because you can think about extrasensory perception, where you can have people entangled, let's say, in mental space or emotional space. So at this level, we can argue that this looks a bit like entanglement in quantum physics. Whether a cell can be entangled with another cell far away in the human body, maybe, I don't know. We need to do experiments to demonstrate this or its equivalence. Now, tunneling is another one. Tunneling, that means that particles can overcome barriers and penetrate through the wave function. That, by the way, has been demonstrated in many enzymatic reactions to take place in biochemistry. So that's not so exotic. And so this is as opposed, so all of these would be non-trivial quantum features of biological systems. And trivial, of course, everything is quantum at the level of atoms and even chemical bonds. So chemistry, by and large, is quantum. And now we are saying that biochemistry is really chemistry, and biology is biochemistry, or can be reduced to biochemistry. Why wouldn't this be, by extension, quantum? Well, because they say it's trivial, but we want non-trivial. So there are some non-trivial examples in quantum biology, and by the way, many and this is not a fringe field. It may be not established, but this is a list of very famous, I would say, genius level physicists who claim that quantum mechanics is essential for understanding life. And you have Niels Bohr, Werner Heisenberg, Erwin Schrödinger, John von Neumann, Carl von Weizsäcker. You have Elsasser that I mentioned, Victor Weizsäcker, Eugene Wigner, Freeman Dyson, Kessler, and many others. Notably, Wolfgang Pauli had extensive correspondence with Carl Jung about quantum ideas, quantum concepts being necessary to explain psychic phenomena, psychology, or let's say the human mind. Carl Jung. There are some books available on their correspondence. Very profound thoughts and coming from geniuses in their own fields. So, as Wikipedia states, quantum biology is a speculative interdisciplinary field that links quantum physics and life sciences. And I think in view of some recent developments, it's not so speculative. And I'll just list some kind of demonstrated effects, which are non-trivial quantum effects. So metabolism at the level of mitochondrial energy production, ATP production involves electron transfer chains where in the inner mitochondrial membrane, where electron tunneling is part of the process, without which ATP wouldn't be produced. So oxidative phosphorylation, by extension, is a quantum process, and there are hallmarks of it that I'll spell out hopefully today in the next 20 minutes or so, showing that that is significant. And then there are biophoton emissions of living systems. It's called ultra-weak emission of light from living systems. There's a lot of work on this, although maybe not prominently highlighted in the literature. I visited a friend, a colleague at the University of Calgary, Christoph Simon, in physics, and his group, Christoph Simon and his group and collaborators showed me they have a dark chamber, and they showed me images they collected from leaves of some trees, which were amazingly glaring with light, emitting photons. And then even more amazingly, they showed me images of the same leaves with a drop of of water with an anesthetic molecule was deposited on the surface, and there was light being emitted from that leaf, except where the anesthetic molecule was. We'll come to it in the next and the last installment of the series. Why is this important? But it's quite amazing. These are just some examples of biophoton emission. There's vast literature on this, and then there's photosynthesis, which until recently was kind of the flagship of quantum biology. There were very serious papers published in top journals, Nature and Science, on photosynthesis, experiments with photosynthetic systems, chlorophyll, showing non-trivial quantum effects, namely entanglement and superposition of states and quantum statistics. Everything was demonstrated both experimentally and then theoretical papers explained it with appropriate models. And then there is literature, Davidov soliton. So these are exciton phonon combinations which propagate along the backbone of alpha helix structures and proteins and DNA that are quantum excitations, allowing for lossless energy transfer within cells. Then, of course, this will be talked about in the last lecture on aspects of neuroscience, which at least metaphorically represent quantum behavior. Then long-range coherent excitations. This is the Froelich theory, again in 1970s and 80s and 90s. Herbert Froelich was a very famous physicist, and he proposed an explanation of this long-range coherence. Remember, non-locality, and somehow you have to find a physical mechanism for propagation across long distances in biological systems. And Froelich proposed that actually biological membranes are composed of phospholipid bilayers, as everybody knows, but importantly, the head groups of these phospholipid bilayers have dipole moments, electric dipole moments, which can be coupled, and they oscillate at high frequencies, and these oscillations can be synchronized into a coherent quantum state, which could explain a lot of things like molecular recognition and so on, and aggregation, assembly of various structures over and above the sort of diffusion type of predictions. And more recently, this was demonstrated experimentally to occur in proteins and such as lysozyme by several groups. One in Sweden by Gergely Katana, in Gothenburg, Katana, and also a group in French and Italian group around Marco Bettini in Marseille. They found evidence for these excitations. Science is a very slow process. Froelich wrote the first papers in the late 60s, 1967, if I remember correctly. These papers that were published in very reputable journals, the best journals in physics. We're talking about 2018, maybe 2018, and this group from France and Italy, maybe 23 last year. So, it takes 40, maybe not, what is it? Almost 60 years, more than half a century to demonstrate some of this painfully slowly. There are some other interesting papers demonstrating coherence in cellular water by a group of Italians, Giuseppe Vitiello, Preparata, and Del Giudice. So is quantum mechanics relevant to biology? And the answer is at small enough scales, definitely. And this is a beautiful representation of this photosynthetic complex called FMO. And you see these papers were in a way breakthroughs in the field of quantum biology. Engel et al. 2007. This is theoretical Mosseni, so that's experimental Engel, and so on. And that complex is capable of absorbing electromagnetic energy from light and exciting electrons collectively across the entire complex system, so it's nanoscale, and then using it for the production of glucose in the downstream effects of photosynthesis. So quite important, because photosynthesis is basically the engine of all life on this planet. Solar energy is captured by plants and used to build a structure. And plants, of course, in the food chain become the fuel for animals, and higher animals become the fuel for nutrients for us. So it's very important, because that's the sort of first step in the creation of the chain of life. And by the way, the second is what I already mentioned, is our metabolism in mitochondria, the formation of ATP molecules in oxidative phosphorylation, which also has a quantum component, at least, which means that metabolism, which is the key to life, metabolism is a quantum process. If the most important process in maintaining life is quantum, then, well, it has major implications for how we should understand biology. And there are some other examples of quantum processes. Magnetoreception. So this is European robins, migratory birds that fly from Europe in the winter to Africa. And of course, we have similar migrations of other birds, like Canada geese, as you probably will know, from Canada to southern US and Mexico. And then they return, and they have incredibly sophisticated and precise navigation apparatus, compass, in the retina of their eyes. So that's and that has been demonstrated after centuries of this being an enigma, unexplained by science. Now, starting with these papers now 20 years ago, and this is what 13 years ago. This was explained by very specific quantum molecular processes, and the accuracy of these migrating birds in detecting magnetic field changes, because they detect the change, and that causes the correction of their course, and when they fly to a given destination, is comparable or better than the most modern magnetic field detection instrumentation that we construct in the lab. That's kind of a summary of how it works. Is basically, this is an electron couple in the cryptochrome molecule of the retina of the eye of that European robin, and the quantum transition occurs when a photon or single quantum of light strikes the retina and causes a transition of this coupled state to a different energy level, and that triggers a signal transmission downstream from it that causes subsequent electrical, mechanical transformations and correction of the course. Anyway, this is quite complicated, I have to admit, but explains very accurately the process. And then we have physiological quantum effects, starting with the fact that the human eye can detect a couple of photons, maybe a single photon. So that's a quantum detector of light. Of course, normally we are flooded with lots of photons, so that's not seen or viewed as a quantum process, but under controlled conditions, it has been determined that as individual photons can trigger physiological response. And another one is the sense of smell, olfaction, which actually does not operate on the principle of lock and key, but on the principle of resonant recognition. So vibrations of the aromatic molecules that we recognize as smell, good or bad, but very potent, and these vibrations of the molecules are resonantly coupled to the vibrations of the receptors, olfactory receptors, and then they trigger downstream nerve activation and perception in the brain of the smell. Obviously, as you know, animals such as dogs have even more acute sense of smell than us, and that a single molecule can be detected, and therefore a single quantum event triggers a reaction. So we mentioned this, we mentioned that, I stated that, and then we have something I left for the next lecture, namely anesthesia, consciousness, and maybe there are some arguments that protein folding could be accelerated if it's a quantum search algorithm by a peptide chain, because it's very fast, and any simulation that is done by classical means fails to explain the speed with which protein folding occurs in reality. And I mentioned that gene mutation also, they are not random, some of them maybe are, but there are specific gene mutations which are, let's say, again, that's a very big topic in terms of evolutionary adaptations and evolutionary acquisition of new features or abilities through gene mutations. So it's very unlikely that these things happen randomly, and therefore there is almost like a need for a process that is intelligent or motivated or driven, whatever word you want to use, and a quantum search algorithm again for gene mutations that will be favorable would explain it. And clearly, when you look at databases of mutations and link different evolutionary processes, you will find that these mutations that are driven by evolution are not random. Okay, this is a slide just illustrating the difference between shape matching, which is lock and key, kind of Linus Pauling idea, which for some receptors, for some processes, is indeed taking place, ligand binding to receptors, but for aromatic, for various reasons having to do with having to do with vibrational frequencies rather than shape matching. This is shape matching here. This is vibrations that have the same frequency, this molecule and the receptor, and that's a resonant interaction. This was recently, maybe not, I don't know, recently, but the last decade or two, promoted and published by a scientist by the name of Luca Turin, and you can find his work on online and in publications in Google Scholar and so on. So he worked for the cosmetic industry, by the way, for a while, and studied this and concluded with a very strong physics background that the only possible explanation for this incredible sensitivity of olfactory receptors to molecules, they can have different shapes, but maybe the same reaction, that resonant quantum effects must be behind it. So there are some other things that maybe I'll just say that this is also somewhat somewhat consistent with bioelectromagnetic field concepts. In other words, that the coherence, unitary sense of biological systems is due to bioelectromagnetic fields. Obviously, organs such as the human brain have their functioning involves electric currents, ionic currents, which create electromagnetic fields around magnetic fields around them, but it's different from electromagnetic fields. Electromagnetic fields are propagating fields, not localized like electric and magnetic separately, and that would be very advantageous for integrating inputs, sensor inputs in the brain, and creating a unified image of the world. So when you look at this screen, for example, you see images, and that's visual perception. You hear my voice, so it's sound, and then you may be touching something and smelling something. All of this comes to you as a unified experience, and we don't know how that becomes integrated in the brain into a single perception of reality. If electromagnetic field had these components, we could easily see that perception of reality could be generated this way, but not by, let's say, neurotransmitters and things of this nature. So the concept of bioelectromagnetic fields has a long history. It goes back to this Russian scientist, Alexander Gurevich. Actually, he imaged the emergence of electromagnetic fields from living systems, from hands and from animals, and yeah, so that's the beginning, and that led to the molecular level of understanding by Herbert Froelich. I told you about the coherence theory of frolic, biological coherence, but all of it has to do with the examination of electromagnetic fields and living systems. So I think the time is up. I'm going to, this is what I already talked about, some more details about the theory that Frolic proposed. It requires pumping of metabolic energy and accounts for the thermal noise, which is endemic, and then relies also on nonlinear interactions between dipoles and membranes. And then this has been very elegantly mathematically developed and shown that coherent oscillations in this range of frequencies emerge, and then they create a metastable condensed state or collective state, if you will. So I'll stop here, and just to give you a teaser for the next and the last lecture, we'll talk about topics related to consciousness, and we'll start with an intelligent cell, and then go from there to understand how our brains may be quantum devices, quote unquote. Thank you, and I will stop sharing now. I don't know if there is any.
Okay, are there any questions? We're kind of at an exciting time, I think, for this set of lectures, in that people are proposing that beyond large language models, you need to consider models that are mainly equations and algorithms and numbers, and that rapidly gets into quantum. And so you don't need quantum computing for that, but you need to go beyond words and so on to explain a lot of things with AI. So quantum is suddenly becoming very topical, and probably the word is sometimes misused. But
Yes.
anyway, maybe it was always misused. Like even quantum computing, Jack was telling me, is not always strictly quantum.
Not quite.
Yeah.
I mean, the computing itself is some processing is quantum, but the aspect of computing may be largely classical. So this is a bit tricky. Just like this, I mentioned non-trivial and trivial quantum effects. So yeah, the non-trivial ones are the hard to explain. And maybe they are metaphorical, maybe there's something like that in the human brain that acts as if it was quantum, but it's not really, quantum per se with a wave function, but just operates like it. But that's for what I want to say to comment on your comment is that I believe that if we want to have AI that approximates the functioning of the human brain, you really have to introduce quantum-like, at least,
Yes.
behavior, some kind of fuzziness, because we are not deterministic zombies. I strongly believe in the free will, and that is linked also to quantum behavior, because if we are just a bunch of classical ping pong balls, bouncing off each other and colliding and so on, then that is not an accurate representation of our human bodies, and especially the brain. So therefore, AI, which is powerful, but it's not really, I would say, creative. And we are creative, at least some of us are sometimes. Do things which are not predictable, completely out of the blue, right? I read today an article about Raja Ramanujan, this Indian genius mathematician, self-taught, and and he got solutions to some big problems in his dreams and out of the blue with no formal training in mathematics. And some of these things are completely unexplainable unless you somehow introduce this, quantum search algorithm and yeah, certainly not linear or classical processes.
Right. Okay, well, we look forward to the last lecture on November 5th, and thank you very much for this today.
My pleasure.
Okay,
Thank you.
take care.
Bye.
Yeah,
Bye.
bye.